Welcome to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. I am your host, Emmy DeGrappa. Wyoming is called the Equality State because we were the first to give women the right to vote. 150 years later, we wonder what Wyoming women think about the progress toward equality now. Let's find out, and thank you for listening. Today, we are talking to Tara Baker. She is a business owner, entrepreneur, artist, and a former Wildland firefighter and EMT for over 6 years. Welcome, Tara.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Tara, I love that you were a former Wildland firefighter and EMT. That sounds really exciting. What did you do what do you do as a wildland firefighter? That's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is a little.
What do you do when you do that?
Well, it really depends on what type of crew you're on. So I only worked for the U.S. Forest Service. The Bureau of Land Management and the Park Service all have wildland fire crews. And then if you go to California, all of the crews they work both wildland and city just because of all of the urban interface out there. So they're trained in both, which is pretty unique. So I was on several different crews. I started my career on a wildland engine. I worked on a fuels crew, a hotshot crew, and finally a helicopter crew. And there's different jobs for each one. Generally, wildland firefighting entails creating a fire break between unburned fuel and the wildfire. You can do that in a variety of different ways, and hopefully that break will stop the fire from spreading further. So yeah, when I was on a hotshot crew, all I did was dig fire line, which is 24 people in a line digging, chainsaws out front. We're coming after with different tools, and each tool is put in line to do a slightly different thing so that no one person is doing the majority of the work. It's very efficient in that way. I had a Pulaski when I was on the hotshot crew, which is a axe head with a scoop on the back of it. I was close to the front of the line. I would run a chainsaw occasionally if the brush or whatever fuel type we were cutting a line through was really thick. And yeah, you just dig line and you build the line width dependent upon what type of fuel you're in. Bigger or wider line for taller, more dense fuels. And then you dig all the way down to mineral soil. So
that sounds like not just a tough job, but dangerous and really a lot of hard work, right?
It was a lot of hard work. Yes, I won't lie.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in West Lafayette, Indiana, or just outside.
Okay. And what was your journey to Wyoming?
Well, my mother was actually born in Cheyenne and back in the 50s. So Wyoming kind of always had an allure to me. My journey to Wyoming was actually for a job on a fire crew, wildland fire crew. I was living in Colorado at the time that I got the job here in Jackson. I had been a wildland firefighter for 3 years, had taken a 2-year hiatus to go to college, get my EMT certificate, and in 2013, I decided I needed to come back to fire. I'd been in school for 2 years. I needed to make some money, and I also missed it. And there had been a government shutdown in 2012, 2013. I applied to, I think, 10 different jobs, and the job on Teton Hell Attack here on the Bridger Teton was the only job offer I got because of the shutdown. So,
oh, that's interesting. So that really was your journey to Wyoming, which came through wildland firefighting.
It was. I came here with the intention of only spending 4 months to work on the crew and then going back to school in Fort Collins, Colorado. And 6 years later, here I am.
Here you are. What do you find intriguing about living in Wyoming?
Oh, so many things. the most powerful things that come to mind are, number one, how wild Wyoming is. I lived in Colorado and Arizona and New Mexico for a long time, and those places each have really amazing aspects to them. But Wyoming has a really wild, untamed feel to it. That might be a little unoriginal to say, but that's really how I feel about it. Everything east of Jackson is very rural. You can drive for hours and just see one or two other cars. The entire state of Wyoming doesn't even have the population of Denver. The greater Yellowstone ecosystem is, really cherished ecosystem because it's one of the last almost fully intact ecosystems in the lower 48. And I find that really special.
Right. And that's really true. It is, what they call it is the Serengeti of the Rockies.
Yes.
That's
exactly.
really true.
Yes.
We have the largest migration in the Yellowstone ecosystem than anywhere else in the lower 48.
Yeah, it's really special. After living here for a while and then traveling elsewhere and coming back, you get that perspective on how unique just the wildlife is here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, as I said earlier, you are a business owner, you're an entrepreneur, you've been a firefighter, and you've just jumped out to start your own business. So what influenced your work and your work ethic, and how did you follow that passion?
Well, I think I don't feel very humble saying this, but I think it has a bit to do with my personality and that I've always been willing to take risks. Becoming a wildland firefighter really taught me how to prepare for and then take risks. And that was a huge toolkit, I guess.
And I'm sure a big part of your commitment to that job.
Yes, absolutely. But specifically, do you want to know who, people or places or how?
Well, if there are people that influenced your drive to maybe pursue your artistic side of yourself, or someone that you have admired that, just I can do that kind of attitude.
Absolutely. There is no one person. No. I've known a lot of firefighters who have been really influential to me. Some female firefighters who are older than me who were part of the scene before. I mean, it's still a largely male-dominated world, but they were some of the first ones to forge that as a female. And there's women, here in Jackson who I really admire and look up to, small business owners and other artists and women who have helped me, in the last year or two since I've been trying to do this, that I really admire and I've gone to for help, and they've helped to not ignite, but kindle, my passion for what I'm doing.
Right.
But something that really comes to mind as a big influencer for being able to take the leap as an entrepreneur is my experiences in wildland firefighting. And we can talk about this more, but this sexual harassment experiences that I had. And
well, let's talk about that now, because that's, okay. I was going to ask you that next, because I know that's something that stood out when we've talked before, is that wildland firefighting is a male-dominated field.
True. And
as you said, there's few women that are in it, but some have forged the way. And so as a woman, what was your experience working in a male-dominated field like that, field like that, out in the middle of nowhere probably, or a lot of times by yourself?
Yeah, definitely. It was mostly really wonderful, but there were some extremely difficult and really challenging times as well. I don't want to paint it as if it was just terrible every day and it was, 6 years of, being treated horribly. I loved it, and so I wanted to be there. But as a woman, you're outnumbered about 10 to 1. The hotshot crew I was on was 24 people, and there was only one other woman and I. My first crew, there was 2 other women, and that was a smaller crew. My fuels crew, which was my second crew, I was the only woman. And then the helicopter crew that I was on here in Jackson, we had 4 to 6 women on a 16-person crew, which was actually a much higher number. Depending on what crew you're on, you can have a really good experience or a really bad experience. That has a lot to do with the leadership that you have, how good they are at listening, what kind of relationship you have with them. The hotshot crew that I was on, I probably had the most difficult experience. It was a younger crew. We had a lot of new recruits, mostly guys in their early to mid-20s. And so, there's a lot of testosterone, you're doing really hard work. You're living out of a bag, sleeping on the ground for 14 to 21 days in really remote areas. So the sense of humor can get extremely vulgar, and it gets, I don't know why when people are maybe taken outside of, social structure, things just sort of fall apart. But there was a lot of things said and done that were just not
appropriate,
not polite, not kind. And I don't know why, but
did that make you fearful? Because
it made me very uncomfortable.
Okay.
I'll say that.
Made you uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable. Every woman that I've spoken with who has fought fire has had a different experience. And, I had some extremely negative experiences, and I know some women who have never had a negative experience, which is wonderful. But, I had some crewmates, especially on the hotshot crew, that when we weren't at work, they're fairly dismissive to me when we were at work. And then when we weren't, they would just try to sleep with me. And when I would turn them down, then they'd be terrible. They'd be really rude and
rejected,
very rejected, and they would just be horrible to me and say some of the worst things. And I've had some of my crewmates say just most horrible, terrible things to me, which that was really difficult because here we are doing this very strenuous, hard work in oftentimes dangerous situations, and you have to be able to trust who you're with. And I didn't always feel like I could, which made it hard.
Oh, yeah. That makes it very awkward, too, that you feel like they crossed a line and you stood up for yourself and almost like you got punished.
Exactly.
For sticking up for yourself.
Exactly, yeah. I did wildland firefighting for 6 years, and so those are the people that I was around the most. So there were a couple of relationships that I had with other firefighters. And it's interesting, what you just said is also true for, being involved with other firefighters. As a woman, you are seen as the problem maker in romantic or sexual, encounters. Guys are always kind of patted on the back and given a high five, like, oh, sweet, you got her into bed. And girls are slut-shamed. Or that was my experience.
Right,
I hope it's not.
Right.
I hope it's not the universal, but
well, I think leading into another question.
Mm-hmm.
How did the #MeToo movement influence your decision to come out and talk openly about your experience with the wildland firefighters, like you just did?
It made it more approachable. It made it a little safer. Other people were doing it. And I was hearing podcasts and talks with women saying how I felt. And it just blew my mind. I was like, oh, wait, other people are having these experiences too. And they've been silent for so long. And there's this awful culture that we've lived with for so long that teaches us you just don't talk about it. you forget about it and you move on, and you're a problem maker if you talk about it, or you're, what's the term they use, whistleblower, and, just sweep it under the rug, forget about it, suck it up, walk away.
Right, just get over it.
Deal with it on your own, but don't make a scene. And eventually it'll change, but we're never told how.
Or what will change since no one talks about it, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, the Me Too movement has been really neat. I really appreciate, the younger generations, my generation and younger than me, being so willing to just step forward and be like, wait a minute, we've been dealing with this for so long. Why don't we just change it? Why don't we talk about it? Because nothing can ever change if you don't talk about it. So bringing it forward as a conversation that needs to be had is the thing I appreciate the most about the Me Too movement.
And how do you feel about women's equality in general?
In the country, or in Wyoming, or just in general?
In Wyoming, and for yourself, and in terms of how have we moved forward, and what are we going to do better? And I think what you just said about #MeToo movement talks about how we're starting to do it better, but actually what has changed?
I think just the fact that it's a conversation now is really powerful. There's a lot that needs to change still. But, if you look at history, we're a young state. We're a really young country. We have not had a lot of time to figure this out. I just went on a trip to Europe, and just in general, the mindset is so different. I can't speak specifically, for women's equality, but just my experience is so different. It's obvious that being a younger country, the U.S. has a long way to come in a lot of ways. I think we're doing well with women's equality. I really like the direction that we're moving. Here in Wyoming, I didn't grow up in Wyoming, so I can't speak to some of the more rural areas. I'm sure that there are some areas of the state that are very limiting, like the Wind River Indian Reservation. I don't know what kind of opportunities women have there. Some of the smaller towns in Wyoming, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it would be all that good. I don't think the opportunities are that great. But I also have heard that larger, older ranches, there's a lot of equality when it comes to ranch work. It's work that needs to get done. And so I think maybe it was even you who told me you've talked to some women who grew up on ranches that they feel that the equality here it's great, So I think it just depends on where you grow up and what your experience is. And, I have high school girlfriends who have worked in academics their entire life, and their experience is completely different than mine, having worked in fire. So I don't mean to, go down a rabbit hole with this answer, but in general, I feel like we're going in a good direction, but perspective is everything. And where you've worked and what you're trying to do is also everything. And I think that speaks very loudly. If you're trying to do something that has always been a male-dominated area, or in a male-dominated area, and you're running into challenging situations, then yeah, we still have a really long way to go.
Right. So going from there to just wanting to learn about your journey and passion into being a silversmith,
yes,
which is also a male-dominated field, by the way. But
I know. I didn't even really
them.
know that. I must be good at being attracted to those fields.
No, but what has been your influence and your passion for making art?
A couple different things. I've always been an artist. I've always been creative. I wanted to go to art school right out of high school, and I wasn't necessarily encouraged for or against it, but generally high school counselors don't really tell you should go to school for art. They don't count that amongst the highest paying jobs in the U.S. So I always had it on the back burner. It's something that kept coming up in my life. And to tie this back into a question you asked earlier, what was one of my biggest influences, not necessarily just for silversmithing, but for being an entrepreneur, and then talking a little bit like I did about some of my experiences with wildland firefighting. having come out and told some stories publicly about the sexual harassment in the Forest Service, I came to this place where I really had to own my opinion about that, and I had to own my voice, which is really intimidating when you're talking about something that can be so criticized and is such a touchy subject. So I feel like I had to really decide what I believed. And I think once you go through that process, you just stop caring so much how people could judge you. Not what people think, but how they could judge you. And you stop being fearful of that. And I think your level of acceptable risk just goes up. And that was a huge piece for pursuing my art for me. I got to this place where I was like, I just don't care anymore. I'm going to do what I want to do. I've always wanted to be an artist, so I'm just going to do it. And then I had a conversation just this past winter, a few conversations with a couple of women in town. Some of the ones who I mentioned have been really big influencers for me. And they own some small businesses, and they're mothers and artists. A couple of them are artists. And I came to them and was like, look, I'm quitting my day job, trying to decide if I should get another one or just go for it with my art. And they all gave me their opinions. They're like, you're not married, you don't have a mortgage, you don't have children. This kind of window of opportunity might never present itself again. Do it.
Good for them. Good for you.
Thanks.
So you're just like, I'm just jumping.
So I did it. Yep.
Good for you. I'm so glad to hear that, Tara. Well,
thank you.
I am really happy that we had this time to talk together. Thank you for talking with me.
Thank you as well.
Thank you for listening to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. Please join us again next week as we continue our conversations with women from around the state. You can also find us at thinkwy.org, where we continue the conversation on our blog about the history, journey, and the challenges of Wyoming's intrepid women living in the equality state. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you for listening.